Welcome back. You're listening to Conservative Conversations with Tom Sarrouf. And I'm pleased to have two guests today, Anna Moreland and Tom Smith. Anna is the Ann Welsh Dow Chair and Director of the University Honors Program at Villanova University. And Tom Smith is the Dean of the Arts and Sciences School at the Catholic University of America, and he was the founding chair of Villanova University's Department of Humanities, where he was a dean and director of the University Honors Program. And the two of them together now have written a book, The Young Adult Playbook, Living Life Like It Matters. And that's what we talked about in our episode today. So we hope you find it helpful and we hope you enjoy it.
Join the best in the movement. It's Conservative Conversations with ISI, educating for liberty since 1953.
Anna Moreland and Tom Smith, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Delighted to be here. Hi, Tom.
So, your new book, The Young Adult Playbook, as I told you, I just finished reading it. I enjoyed it. It's quite practical. So I think this is a different taste for our listeners today, many of whom are young adults. So it's a perfect audience. Hopefully you'll get plenty of play, go by and read the book. But it's a bit different on what we do for the podcast is, we'll talk about some sort of issue or some sort of philosopher or thinker. But this is, I think, maybe a bit more practical, though it's tied to questions of the good life and the things of, the first principles of philosophy. But to start, why did you write this book? How did you come to work together on it?
So Tom and I have been friends and colleagues for a long time, until, of course, Tom left me and joined Catholic University of America as dean there. But we'd been listening to students together for decades, right, Tom? And we'd have shared conversations, and we were part of a curricular initiative together. And I walked into Tom's office one day and said, "Do you want to write a book with me?" And he said, "Sure." And we spent that summer putting the proposal together. And the truth is, Tom, I don't think either of us anticipated what a great experience it was going to be, and really kind of how transformative it was going to be for both of us, for how we look at our work. And it was a great experience, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree. It's just been a real blessing to work with Anna and work on a project that we really believe in. She calls it a labor of love, and that's definitely right. We love our students. We love this book. So, yeah.
Hey there, listener. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations. This podcast is a production of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and our mission here at ISI is educating for liberty. If you'd like to join us in fulfilling our mission, consider helping us by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, to help us reach more listeners like yourself. Now, back to the show. There's a whole genre of self-help. You think Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, or Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life, Simon Sinek, Start With Why. There's like literally thousands, and some people just read self-help. What makes your book different, or what does it add to the conversation that's maybe missing from other books?
That's a great question. One of the things that I was thinking about as we wrote this book was the advice that young adults get from older people, which I think is inevitably bad. And it's typically keep your options open. Go to college, get a degree that's fungible, get your first job to get your second job. Don't settle in a place. Think about where you want to be in 10 years. I think that's bad advice because it doesn't root you. It doesn't commit you. It doesn't give you a sense of ownership. It doesn't give you a sense of what you want to get good at over a lifetime and the kind of relationships you want to build. You're kind of walking through life keeping things at arm's length in a way. And I think it leads to a lot of mischief. And so our book is different because we sort of put a stake in the ground and say, there's a couple essential building blocks of a good life, and they're rooted in relationships and in good work, in finding a life partner who's going to make you happy, and you can make him or her happy, and that there's specific skills that you need in order to achieve those things, and you need to commit to those things.
I just want to add to that, Tom, that a lot of these self-help books assume that young adults already know what they want. they're very like design your life as if you already know what kind of life you want to lead as an 18 to 22 to 25 to 27-year-old. And we found that young adults need advice from people who've been around the block and who care about them. And so, as Tom says, we're not afraid to ask the large questions. What makes a good life? We're not afraid of that. And we think there are better lives worth living and worse lives worth living. And young adults are hungry for those real conversations.
Certainly, I definitely see that in my work with ISI, is that students they reject the idea that, you can just build yourself. Not only because the students who come through ISI are of a conservative bent, so that sort of relativism is, beaten out of them from the get-go. We start with, there is a truth and you can know it. That's the basis of liberal learning to begin with. But the how, the practical, what does this actually look like is often missing. So I think another, strength of the book, and another one I thought was the journaling. You have these sorts of journaling exercises. What was the thought process, or how did you figure out, what is worth doing this sort of journaling exercise?
So one of the strengths of the book is really students helped us write it. So we found that the journaling exercises actually help students because the point is, yes, there are better lives worth living than others, and yet what are you seeking? What are your deepest desires in your own concrete circumstances? And so there's a lot of introspective work that the book tries to get you to engage in. And the best way to do that is to take a pause, to pick up a pen and paper, and to engage in those journal exercises. And we found them to be just astonishingly effective.
And because there was like a class involved with this too, as the writing went on, how did the class reinforce or add to what the final product was with the book?
I would say the book really came out of the class and the experience of the class. And the class was called Shaping an Adult Life. It's a sequence of courses taken over the experience of a college student from their coming into college, and then in sophomore year as they look for work, and then in senior year as they anticipate jumping out of college into their 20s. And at each kind of developmental inflection point, there's kind of an intervention with these courses where we say, okay, what is it that you really want to do? How can you be intentional about things like friendship and the intellectual life, and finding a romantic partner, thinking about your relationship to social media and free time. And so the experience was so transformative in the class, we wanted to write a book for people that we couldn't teach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, so these three themes, so for all the people this is their first education with you two, or in the classroom now, three main themes of the book are work, leisure, and love. The work and leisure, I mean, they're all interconnected because they're all at the heart of what the good life is. But the work and leisure especially, what is work and what is leisure at its most fundamental? Maybe Anne, I'll start with you.
Sure. So both are deep gifts that are entwined or sort of rooted in the gift of human life. And we talk about work as a gift to be experienced and to be treasured. And we talk about leisure in the same way, and they both come from the same energy of living. And so there's a way in which we blur the lines between work and leisure. And so we encourage our readers to be as satisfied and energized in what they're doing for work as they are in what they're doing for leisure.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is that young people are taught to kind of blend those together, that as they go through high school and prepare for the college application experience, they're taught to kind of build a resume that they can drive at admissions committees. And so all the fun stuff that you used to do and enjoy as a kid, sports and so on, become travel sports leagues, and writing becomes editor of the yearbook. And you're kind of, instead of focusing on things that you enjoy for their own sake, kind of leisure activities, you transform them into drudgery, work. And so bounding those things and being more reflective about what meaningful work is and how it serves not just to build up wealth, but also build up the human family. That's one dimension of it. But also rescuing free time so that you can do things that you genuinely enjoy and you're not merging it into some other project. We find that really liberating for young people.
And so much of the book is really giving young people the courage to say, like, I'm not going to settle. I'm not going to settle in work. I'm not going to settle for doom scrolling and leisure. And I'm not going to settle in love. I deserve more. And the book is all about convincing young people you deserve more, and here's how to help you get it.
Yeah, one of the things I was challenged by was this idea of like, at once we're going to elevate work. I mean, I love my job. That's not what I'm implying, but the idea of elevating work also entails limiting work. I wonder if you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, work is a really important dimension of life. You're given all these gifts and talents that you want to vent, and you should take pride in your work, and you should get good at your work, and you should come home with a sense of fulfillment. Not every job is going to give you that kind of satisfaction all the time. You know, faculty members have to grade exams, so this is not something we always enjoy. And every career has something like that in it. But you shouldn't just settle for work as a means of making money. Money is obviously important if you're going to support yourself and your loved ones. But it has to have that sense of fulfillment and purpose. And the loss of that has led to this devaluation of work, and at the same time overvaluation of work, because we don't know what it's for. And so we want to restore that sense of work being a gift, and serving your talents and serving the human family, but also put bounds around it so it doesn't become all consuming. Putting things in their place is really important in a healthy life.
And so what is your advice? Because one of the things I think you're trying to address is the sort of idea of like the lost 20s, where people are kind of like bouncing from this thing to that thing kind of aimlessly. They don't have a sense of purpose or what they're doing. What's, in terms of work in particular, what is your practical advice for avoiding that sort of, because on the one sense, if you're trying to find meaningful work, you have to know what's meaningful to you or what's meaningful in itself, and then pursue that. But that can be a challenge, and part of it I think that came through in the book for me is that it's individualized, as well as we all have different gifts and talents. So what are some foolproof or helpful, kind of almost can't fail tips for like finding that thing and then going and pursuing it?
So in the work section of the book, we delineate different steps for discernment. And those are really practical ways to help people move through when they're at an inflection point, a decision-making point, and what they're going to do with their lives. So you get some real practical advice, and you move away from thinking about a big decision in terms of a pro-con list and towards thinking about a big decision in terms of a set of goods on one side of the decision and a set of goods on the other side of the decision. And you've got to weigh those goods. And choosing one side always involves the tragedy of walking away from the other set of goods. And this discernment process helps you honor that tragedy and that commitment to one thing. It's just going to involve a saying no to a whole other set of goods. But that really shifts things for young people who use this method, because they move away from kind of a quantification of what's got more pros, fewer cons, and toward an actual sort of qualitative discernment process that really helps them. But in the work section, what we really want is to help students actually take risks and find work that works for them, because it's not just that in their 20s a lot of people are kind of bouncing around from job to job. It's also a lot of people in their 20s are just miserable in the jobs they have, and they don't have the courage to send out those resumes and to take a risk and to leave that job that you're not happy in.
I'm trying to think what I want to ask next, or how I want to get to my next question. It's what you were talking about, the tragedy of existence is the sort of limitation. On the one sense, you want to say, you can have more, you deserve more, you have to go out and get it. That's part of it, is the sort of almost the pioneering spirit, the risk taking.
Yeah,
Um,
well put.
but at the same time, having more also means you can't have it all. The sort of tragedy existentially is that, right? Like me being a programs manager at ISI means I can't be a doctor
Right.
theoretically if I wanted to be a doctor. So how do you, what's your sense in your careers talking with students about, especially, Villanova, a Catholic university, these are like smart kids. They could kind of do anything. How do you help them pick one thing or two things, whereas they might, what is it, like choice paralysis? They
Yeah.
have too many options. They end up not making a choice at all. How do you help people overcome the tragedy of not being able to do everything, especially if they think that they could, or they actually might be able to in theory, do anything? Does that question make sense?
It does. I mean, one way of thinking about it is a tragedy. Maybe there's a tragic dimension to it. This is kind of the Peter Pan myth, right? Pan means everything. When you're a young child, you're capable of everything, anything. You're kind of pluripotent. And growing up is closing off some of those options. You marry this person rather than this. You do this career rather than that. You live in this place, not that. And that does involve a certain kind of sacrifice. At the same time, if going back to my original point, if you think your job in life is to keep your options open, you never learn to play a particular instrument or learn a particular language. If I decide to learn French rather than Portuguese, I can go to Paris and flirt with French waitresses. I wouldn't do that now. But if I learn to play the piano, instead of keeping my options open, I can play anything I want to on the piano. It actually opens up potentials to commit to something and decide you're going to get good at something. I'm going to get good at this marriage. I'm going to get good at this friendship. I'm going to get good at this job. That allows you to tap into potentials that are only latent, are only potential if you keep your options open. And so part of the job of helping students to take risks and find their courage to do that is to give them a vision of what could be on the other side of that, the kind of life that they could enjoy. This is part of the reason that stories are so important in that book. Is they need to get out of their head, which is, their typical way of thinking about it is, what am I good at? What am I good at? What am I good at? And the book challenges them to think differently and say, what could I get good at? And what do I want to commit to?
And we try to help them expand their professional imagination because their imaginations have been so reduced that there are only a couple of professions worth pursuing. And yet there are a lot of really worthwhile professions that they have no idea are out there. And so part of that work, part of the process of those 2 chapters on work is to help them really dig deep and think about professions beyond the well-trodden paths.
Yeah, when I went to Boston College, something that we always talked about was that like what you major in or what you focus in during college has very little correlation to what you'll do afterwards. Um, why do you think it persists that we have these sorts of narrow things? Because in one sense, to me at least, it makes sense that we have these sorts of right, you have like the tried and true that pushes people forward, especially if we might be recalcitrant or hesitant to take the push forward that we need to truly become adults. But on the other hand, it's sort of trapping. So what's the balance between, I guess, you can do anything and break all of the rules versus the social utility of something like the pushing towards college or the pushing towards like certain professions, the practical things, the stems and the what of the world, things like that.
Anxiety is in the driver's seat for a lot of our young people as opposed to their hopes and dreams. And the book tries to push anxiety out of that driver's seat and push their hopes and dreams right into the driver's seat. And look, if I were 22 years old and I went on Indeed for 45 minutes, I'd be pretty depressed too. And on the one hand, there are just too many choices. And so you want to flock to the tried and true because you're overwhelmed by the choice. And on the other hand, you've got to be led by, you've got to have mechanisms to lead you to possible fruitful work paths. And that's what the book tries to do, that Indeed is not equipped to do.
Yeah, and I think Anna and I are pretty realistic about the challenges that young people face. We have children. Mine are on the other side of college as are in college. We know the pressures from our students around debt, um, the algorithms that Indeed uses, the fact that you can send out 20 resumes and not hear from anybody. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that young people face. Um, but this kind of keeping your options open doesn't help things. It doesn't make it better. It only makes it worse. Um, and there's also, it's just hard to grow up. I mean, that's the other thing that I think is an important message of the book. It was hard to grow up when we were young. There's just unique pressures today that are very different than what previous generations experienced. And I think part of the strength of the book is that it honors those, and it gives students a sense that somebody is kind of seeing their experience and recognizing it, um, and giving them creative ways through it.
Yeah, moving us ahead towards the concept of leisure now in greater detail. You could dedicate a chapter to the idea of wasting time. Um, and this might be a very large question, but is wasting time kind of a function of modern life? Or were you guys, I mean, not were you guys wasting time? That's not the right question. Like, I feel, is this something of the human condition just generally? Because I guess a lot of the examples you were using were like video games, social media, vegetating, watching television, things, we all do in the modern world. But it reminds me of what Joseph Pieper talks about when he talks about the idea of visual noise is the sort of mass culture produced for a mass man that's going to be more vegetative. And I don't know if I hear about Alexis de Tocqueville talking about the great souled men of old wasting time. Is this a human condition, or is this a function of our, particular historical moment that we might need to break out of or think beyond?
So, I mean, I can't speak for Tom, but I certainly wasted time when I was 18 to 22. No doubt about that. But there are particular ways that young people waste time today because they're connected to mechanisms that are designed to addict them. We didn't have that. So we could waste time spending 5 hours at the dining hall talking to our friends. And now your phone tells you that you are on it 6 to 8 hours a day. That's a lot of time that can be used in other ways. And so we talk about, we've got this image of the garden in the leisure parts of the book, and we talk about the phone as a super predator. But what's really important about that leisure section is that, of course, we should all be less addicted to our phones, but it's just as important to think about what you're going to plant as to what you're going to weed out. And so we talk about recovering childhood practices. A lot of young people used to play guitar or play pickup basketball or wrote music or painted. I mean, there's a lot of creativity that's been tamped down by the productivity machine that is the current college environment that needs to be uncovered and unleashed and sort of brought back into their lives.
Yeah, it almost sounds like an oxymoron to talk about practicing leisure, but in another sense, that's not true at all. It's like you do it something you have to sort of cultivate over time.
Yeah.
So I guess, how do you practice leisure? And Tom mentioned earlier the idea of like, if I play baseball, all of a sudden I'm in, 3 AAU leagues year round, traveling here, there, everywhere. It becomes like a full-time job. So maybe you could also speak to how leisure can stay leisure and not become just another work thing you do that's like fun or you enjoy it, but it can remain in its proper place, as you talked about earlier, Tom.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it happens on both sides of the coin, right? So on the one hand, work is so all-consuming. Young people are so busy trying to keep, from high school on into the 20s, making their own brand, making sure they're padding their resume, and doing all the things they need to do to succeed according to the social script. That when they finally lay that project aside, they're so exhausted by it that the only thing they can do is kind of pick up the phone or the video game and get on the screen. And there's a sort of a consolation in that distraction, I think. At the same time, when they go to the library, they study much longer than they need to because they're constantly picking up their phone.
Mm-hmm.
So the work grows in its length and becomes less effective, and that crowds out even more free time. And so one of the messages is, these are really, like Anna said, really powerful technologies. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but there was a kind of conspiracy between big tech and psychologists, and they captured and monetized our attention. And that's a really powerful force at work in our society, and it's often very destructive to fundamental things like attention and relationship. And you can't just go on a diet and expect it to succeed. You have to substitute. This is why the image of the garden is so important. You have to substitute something as powerful as that technology in your life that's more attractive to you. And our proposal is that it is things that give you joy, friendship, and like Anna said, the kind of stuff that you used to do when you were a kid and you didn't think about being your own personal brand.
I could be totally off on this, but I get the sense that as we grow up, things become less joyful. Like the move from childhood to through adolescence, young adulthood, you lose joy, or it's harder to find. I don't really know why that is, but I wonder, like my one kind of, I guess, theory on this is the idea of boredom. And I don't know what to make of this, but how do you think boredom fits into the equation of kind of moving through the stages of life?
Boy, that's a really good question. I think it has maybe, I'm just throwing spaghetti against the wall here, but I'm wondering if it has something to do with self-consciousness. When you're a child, you don't have a sense that you're being looked at. And so you're really free to enjoy whatever comes along. And one of the joys of having very young children is that you get to participate in that vicariously. Little kids just running around doing crazy fun stuff that gives them profound joy. And we don't, I think in some ways we're too buttoned up. We're too driven by anxiety. We're driven by how other people might perceive us. To just have that elemental experience, which is the sap of life, I think.
Well, and I think in particular as well, the phones don't allow us to be bored. And being alone in a room with our own thoughts is terrifying. So we go to our phones as a substitute. And that then inhibits us from asking those deep questions about who am I, who do I want to be, who do I want to spend my life with, and what do I want to do for a living? Those are really important questions for college students and people in their 20s to ask thoughtfully and carefully and intentionally.
Yeah, the only thing, I think that's dead right. And the only thing I would add to that is all the things that Anna mentioned are things that you want to serve, things that you want to devote yourself to, things you want to give yourself over to. And as an adult, joy comes naturally to child, but I think as an adult, joy comes when you find that purpose, that person that you want to serve, that you want to give yourself over to. That's the paradox. As you fall in love with that and you give yourself over to it, strangely you find yourself by giving yourself away.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Tom, to talking about the third theme, which is love and romance, eros. What are the trends right now with young people and dating and romance? We hear terrible stories. You can talk about the national dearth. We've talked about declining birth rates, declining family formation. People are opting out. Is it true? Is it overhyped? What's the kernel of truth? What's causing all of these things? Are we headed for disaster?
I'd say spending my day in and day out with college students, we can't be headed for disaster because there's so much hope and creativity and optimism and generosity among this generation. So I think some of those doom and gloom things are overblown, and yet it is true that they're terrified of each other. That COVID had a really big impact, that the phone has had a really big impact. They don't know how to spell dating. I think I gave a dating workshop a couple of weeks ago in which a student apparently said everything she said was right, totally persuasive, and yet I'd rather be waterboarded than ask somebody out on a date. So there's a lot of work to do. They're flying blind. The manual is unbelievably basic that they need to follow, and yet adults need to step in because their friends are flying just as blind as they are.
Yeah. I mean, there's an epidemic of loneliness. I think that's the place to start.
Mhm.
And we are in a moral panic about hookup culture. The statistics are that hookup culture is, it's a problem, but it's not as much of a problem as people think it is. Um, this generation is not dating and not hooking up in the way that my generation was, let's say. Um, the real problem is that they're lonely and they think that everybody else is in a relationship. And so that makes the feeling of loneliness even worse. But the hope is that the human heart doesn't want to be lonely. The human heart wants to be connected. And so you just need some caring adults to give students some practical experience with dating and what it looks like, how to do it, what are some basic ground rules, because there are no ground rules. I gave a dating workshop last year, and this young woman told the story of going out on a date and kind of negotiating about the who paid the bill, and the guy paid the bill, and then when she got back, when he walked her back to the apartment and she didn't let him up, he said, "Okay, goodbye," and then texted her, "Venmo me your half of the bill." So there was this sort of transactional dimension that she wasn't even aware of, and it's partly because there's no rules around it, and so you just assume that everything's transaction. Um, and I think they're terrified of that. They're terrified of rejection. They're terrified of the fact that they don't know how these things should go, and there's no rules. And so a lot of the book is just these exercises where you say, okay, here's a low risk, high reward date. Go out for coffee in the middle of the day. Take 45 minutes, a half hour, 45 minutes. A-frame hug. No harm, no foul if it doesn't work out. And here's how it should be structured. And here's how you know whether you should think about a second date.
I mean, speaking as a young man, I have a girlfriend, so I don't have to worry about this anymore. But asking someone out on a date was terrifying in college. That was like one of the scariest things you could do. So yeah, that's relatable. I wonder too, there's this sort of, it's not simply an online thing, but this sort of terrified, it's not only the terrified part of asking someone out, but also there's something that we saw in this recent election was the gender gap. And so you can see on the one hand, there's like, so I wonder, we were talking earlier about the phones. How does social media amplify some of the dysfunctional elements of dating, whether it's the, extreme feminism on the one hand, opt out, be yourself, you don't need no man, on the one hand, and then also the sort of like, recently I think it's been called like the wife jack attack, is like, men shouldn't be seeking their validation in a woman, go conquer something, or like men going their own way, the sort of like incel thing, even though I think it gets overplayed. Is that something you notice amongst your students?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really a perceptive question. Part of the problem is that when you fall in love, you realize you're not complete by yourself. And so a lot of the myths around love in Plato's Symposium or in Genesis have to do with this experience of being pierced by love, having a wound opened up by love. Love is a matter of confronting in a certain way your own vulnerability and your own need for another to complete you. That's part of the reason why the fear of rejection is so overwhelming, because rejection is devastating. Because when you open yourself up to that vulnerability, you're really putting yourself out there. But if it's true that you're not complete until you find somebody that you can really devote your life to, um, all of the stuff that you were talking about is a lie. The incel stuff, the I don't need no man stuff, the like actually we do need each other in pretty significant ways. Navigating that is a whole different question. Making sure that you can navigate intimacy in ways that respect the other, that guard the trust that the person is placing in you. Um, I think that is one of the things that we're proposing as a way of not settling.
Yeah, and I just want to add that people arrive both to college and into their 20s carrying some pretty severe wounds, a lot of times not of their own making, some pretty unhappy households, some horrible experiences. And so, for some really valid reasons, there are a lot of men and women 18 to 30 who are walking around and deciding to opt out, right? Deciding not to seek what their heart's desire wants, as Tom said. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, do you have any gendered advice? I didn't, when I was reading the book, it was kind of, I think it was the same or quote unquote gender neutral advice, but men and women are different and they have different expectations both for themselves and maybe different inborn drives and different societal expectations that they either might want to follow or not follow. Um, but that was something that didn't come through in the book, and I'm sure you're both one man, one woman see things a little bit differently too. So what would you, if you had any advice specific to the ladies or to the guys, what might that be?
We talked a lot about whether we should talk or take up gender. Quite frankly, we struggled with it a lot, Tom. We did, and ended up exactly as you noticed, not doing that, going down that road. But if I had one thing to say, I would say, like, don't wait for the guy to ask you out. Take it, take initiative. If we waited for guys to sort of initiate social change, not a lot would happen. So don't complain that there aren't guys around for you to go out with. Go out and find them.
Yeah, and I would just say, I'll just say how I talk about it with my own kids. So I have boys and a girl. And to my daughter, I will say, notice how your boyfriend treats the women in his life. His mom, his sisters, his aunt, his friends that are women. Does he treat them with respect? Does he cherish them? Does he think about their needs? Because that's probably how he's going to treat you. And to the sons, they want respect. They deeply want the respect and admiration of their female partner. That's something that I think sometimes gets lost. That's a deep kind of, if you want to say it, male hunger. Not that women don't want to be respected either, but I see that showing up for my sons in really profound ways.
That makes sense. Maybe it's something that kind of ties all of this together is, when we're talking about love, whether the sort of deep desire and longing for meaningful work or for pursuits in our free time and our non-working time that are meaningful, not just spent vegetating, but add value to our lives, contribute to our happiness and joy, or to the other. That's all of these things are motivated by our loves, and it reminds me of Saint Augustine and the City of God. And so this is not mentioned. I feel like it's maybe esoteric or sitting in and throughout the book is the role of religion or the role of some connection to a transcendent or higher power. And it's not in the book, and I'd be curious if this is a strategic thing on your part, but also what you would say to young people, advice for how to figure themselves out with respect to the highest things. Work, leisure, and love are all very high, but I think they're all unified by the love that we owe to our Creator. What do you think?
We really, we know our students because we see them. We don't know who our readers are and don't know where they start. And so The book doesn't presuppose anything in the way of religious belief. I think it's fair to say it's very important for me and Anna, for Anna and I, central dimension of our lives. Um, but the practical advice that we have on these in these dimensions of life, uh, we didn't want to presuppose anything in the way of religion. Um, I would say if you're a religious believer, as I am, and you believe in a creator God, as I do, um, it gives you a sense of why the things that you encounter in life are so powerfully attractive. Your friendships, your romantic partner, your work, what you do in your free time, they're expressions of God's love and care. But they also, because they're so attractive, um, are also potential objects of worship, sort of to give them a sense of ultimate meaning and ultimate concern, ultimate attention. And part of the work of the book is, like as we say, elevating these things, recognizing how great they are, but also putting them in their place. What Augustine would call ordered love, which I think is a very tame way of talking about the kind of spiritual practice that I'm talking about. You don't want to cling to these things possessively. You don't want to worship them. That ruins them. You also don't want to push them away. You want to recognize how great they are.
Yeah, and I would just add that as the manuscript developed, we've taught it to hundreds of students and alumni, and we've had students all over the spectrum with respect to religious belief, very pious students and students who grew up in very radically secular households, and all sets of students have responded positively. So I think if you've got an ear for the religious music, you're going to hear it in the book. And if you don't, you're not going to be alienated by the language of the book. That's the key. That's really, I think, what Tom and I were going for. We wanted to cast as wide a net as possible without weakening the message.
Yeah, that makes sense, of course. And one other, the book I think is targeted largely to college students. CUA, Villanova, those are pretty elite places as well, but it could be broadly applicable to anyone. But a lot of the examples, I think, understandably come from your own experience, and that's just it is a different sort of caliber of person or someone who's at a school like Villanova, or if I could put BC in that same category. But what about advice for people who aren't going to pursue college? As this, I think, especially as more economic alternative and educational pathways emerge that are opting out of the college model, whether it's a gap year and that translates into something interesting, or just like, I'm no interest in college at all. I don't know what I want to do with my life. Do you have life advice for those people, or how does the same life advice apply, but maybe in a slightly different format for those people?
Yes, I think the stories might change, the particular stories, but the basic humane and humanistic message would stay the same. There are three building blocks to a life well lived: meaningful work, leisure that fulfills, and loving relationships. That's true whether you go to college or not.
Yeah. And I would say, in terms of, let's just focus on meaningful work for a second. Um, One of the things that people in elite institutions sometimes think of is the work that they're going to do is kind of white collar brain work.
Mm-hmm.
The work that trades do is blue collar manual work. But actually, if you've done any of the kind of trade work, HVAC or construction or whatever, there's an enormous amount of mental work that goes into it. Um, when I redid my bathroom, I had a headache all the time thinking about measuring and cutting and tiling and plumbing, and it's just an enormous amount of creative problem solving that maybe even goes beyond kind of a corporate law job where you're really doing piecemeal work. Um, and so that problem doesn't go away, of thinking about your work in this sort of capacious, meaningful way. And if you hang out with a contractor and drive around with her or him, they'll say, oh, I worked in that house, I worked in that, and they're really proud of it. They're proud that they made people's lives better and improved their residences and so on. That's terrific.
Last question for you both. I've enjoyed our conversation. This is the last question you both ask in the book is, how do I know when I've made it?
I think Tom said something earlier that I just want to echo about not looking for the next thing, but rather living for others in every facet of your life. So when you become a fountain for others, as opposed to a sponge that's absorbing from other people, that's when you're living a life well lived.
Tom, anything to add?
Can't top that. No.
Okay. Perfect. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you both so much. If people want to focus on or find more of your work, what do you recommend to them for each of you?
The book can be found on Amazon, theyoungadultplaybook.com. We have a website. Tom and I are delighted to hear from any reader. We'd love to engage with our audience, not our audience, but our readership. Both of our institutional emails are readily available. So reach out. We'd love to talk to you.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations with ISI. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our website at isi.org/resources to see all that we offer our members, including the Intercollegiate Review, select modern age articles, debates, lectures, and of course, this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and we will see you next time on Conservative Conversations with ISI.